Today we have a seminar by Dr. Aarti Shashi, who's an NBHM postdoctoral fellow at the School of Mathematics, IIT Thiruvananthapuram. She joined here in May 2021. She completed a PhD from IIT Madras and she works in the area of harmonic analysis. So, without further ado, on to ma'am.
Thank you. So first and foremost, good morning. I'd firstly like to thank the Math Club, this department, for giving me this opportunity to talk before all of you. It's indeed my pleasure to talk before all the faculty and students of this department. So today I'm going to talk about the orthonormality of wavelet system on the Heisenberg group. So first, we'll recall what is orthonormality and then introduce some preliminary concepts such as frames and ray spaces. Then we'll see what we mean by system of translets, what is the wavelet system, and some results connecting these, some results regarding these on the real line, which is a classical case. Then we shall look at a brief literature survey, which talks about related problems in this area. Then we shall see what is the Heisenberg group, and then the results on the orthonormality of wavelet system on the Heisenberg group. And finally, we shall address the problem of completeness of this collection. So we start with a separable Hilbert space H, and we recall that a sequence of elements in this separable Hilbert space is orthonormal if the inner product of Fi Fj is delta Ij. That is, if we take two different elements, the inner product is 0, and if we take the inner product with itself, it is 1. And if we have a maximal orthonormal system, that is, if we take any function, say g, which is orthogonal to each of these elements fk, then the g is 0. That is, there is no other orthonormal system larger than this which is containing it. If this is the case, then that sequence is an orthonormal basis. Now, there are various equivalent conditions for an orthonormal system to be an orthonormal basis. One of these is this. It is this relation between the norm of f and the inner product of f with each of these basis elements. So we have norm f square equal to summation over k square of the modulus of the inner product of f and fk. So this relation, this is called the Parseval's formula. And there is another relation which gives the expansion of any element in the Hilbert space in terms of these basis elements, which is f can be represented as summation over k, ck, fk, where those coefficients ck are uniquely determined as the inner product of f with fk. So that's orthonormal basis. And now let's look at something which is a generalization of the orthonormal basis, which is this frame. So a sequence of elements in the Hilbert space is said to be a frame if there exist positive constants satisfying this inequality. So we saw in the case of orthonormal basis, this sum was equal to norm f square. So that has been relaxed here and it needs to satisfy this inequality. So it's a norm f square less than equal to this sum less than equal to b norm f square. So a and b are positive constants and these are called the frame bounds. So another point is that I mentioned earlier that if we have an orthonormal basis, then the representation is unique. While we may think that uniqueness is something that is really sought after, in certain applications such as signal transmission, denoising signals, it is not so. We would prefer redundancy. For example, if we were to transmit a signal and when we want to reconstruct, if some coefficient is lost, in the case of an orthonormal basis, there is no hope of reconstructing it. But if we have some sort of redundancy allowed, then we might still be able to reconstruct the signal. So that is what gives frame an advantage. When we use frame sequence, we can have a representation where the representation is not unique. The redundancy is allowed. So that is what makes frame very useful in applications involving signals. Now let's look at an example, a simple one. So if we take Ek to be an orthonormal basis, and if we have the sequence wherein E1 is repeated once and all the others as such, then we have a frame with frame bounds 1 and 2. If we were to repeat each of these basis elements once, that is E1, E1, E2, E2, and so on, then we will have a frame with frame bounds each 2. The lower frame bound and the upper frame bound are both 2. And if we have the lower frame bound and the upper frame bound equal and both equal to 1, then we have what is known as a Parseval frame. So if you recollect, this was the condition that was satisfied, that is satisfied by any orthonormal basis. So the difference here is that we have this condition, but of course the sequence need not be orthonormal. So this is how the Parseval frame is. So we'll look at an example. If we take EK to be an orthonormal basis, and if we have E1, E2 by root 2, which we repeat twice, E3 by root 3 appearing 3 times, that is basically we have EK by root K appearing K times, then this condition will be satisfied, and so this sequence is a Parseval frame. But on the other hand, if we have each of these occurring only once, that is we have E1, E2 by root 2, E3 by root 3, that is simply EK by root K, then it is not even a frame. The upper frame bound is not a problem, it will be satisfied, but we will not have the lower frame bound. That is, for no positive constant will we have that lower inequality. And this is another example of a frame. So we consider the Hilbert space R2 and we take these 3 points, right? And if we take any x in R2, say xy, and if we find out this inner product, take the modulus, square it, for each of these, add them up, then what we would get is 3 by 2 times. If this x was taken as the coordinates, say x comma y, then we'll have mod x square plus mod y square. So this shows that it is a frame with the lower frame bound and the upper frame bound equal to 3 by 2. We could normalize it, push this side, then we will have square root of 2 by 3 coming in everywhere, and in that case, it will be a Parseval frame. Now, if we see these points, and if we were to plot it in the xy plane, so x1 will be on the y-axis, and x2 and x3 will be in the third and fourth coordinates. And if we were to join the origin to these points, what we would get is the symbol of the Mercedes, and hence this has the name Mercedes frame. Now let's look at another concept, which is that of the Riesz basis, which is again a generalization of the orthonormal basis, but frame is more general than this. So the definition of a Riesz basis is as follows. So it is a family of the form UEK, where EK is an orthonormal basis and U is a bounded invertible operator on H. So it is basically the image of an orthonormal basis under a bounded invertible operator. So we know that all orthonormal bases can be characterized as the action of unitary operators on the orthonormal basis. So that has been relaxed here. We just need to have the bounded invertible operator. But for many practical purposes, in many applications, what we see is we use this equivalent character condition. So some books take this also as a definition of a Riesz basis. So a sequence as a Riesz basis is if K is complete in H and there exists positive constants satisfying this. So we need to take only any finite scalar sequence for which this holds. So we should have norm summing over K, Ck Fk squared is less than equal to B times summation mod Ck squared, and it is greater than equal to 8 times summation over K mod Ck squared. So this equation in fact shows that the representation in terms of the Riesz basis is actually unique. So if we have summation Ck Fk is 0, then each of the Ck's are 0. And for an example, if we take Ek to be an orthonormal basis for H, and if we have 2E1, E2, E3, and so on, then that is a Riesz basis with bounds 1 and 2. Now let us look at some important operators on L2 of R. So these operators are important in time frequency analysis, specifically when I need to speak about system of translates or the wavelet system. So let phi be in L2 of R, then the translation operator denoted by Ts, by the parameter is S. So for any real S, the translation by S of phi at X is phi of X minus S. So it's operating on the L2R element phi, and Ts phi is another L2R element. Now for the modulation operator, the modulation by S of phi at X is phi of X multiplied by this term. And for the dilation operator, for any non-zero real, dilation by A of phi at X is given by 1 by square root of mod A phi of X by A. So this is just a normalization factor so that we have the unitary and the isometry. These three operators are unitary operators. Okay, so now let's understand what is system of translates. So we're just looking at what it is in L2 of R. So we take a function phi in L2 of R and we apply the translation operator on phi, translates by all the integers. So then we generate a collection of elements. It is generated by this single function phi, that is system of translates. And then we see when will this system, when will this sequence be orthonormal, when it will be a frame, when it will be a Parseval frame, and so on. So that is the characterization that we are looking at. So these are well-known results, the proofs of which can be looked up in books by Christensen, for example. I'll give you the reference in a while. So the system of translates dk phi is an orthonormal system in L2 of R if and only if this condition holds true. So this is given in terms of the Fourier transform of phi, the summation over k and z square of the modulus of phi roof of psi plus k, that should be 1. This is in fact called the weight function in the literature. So that should be 1 for almost every psi in 0, 1. And this collection is a frame for its closed linear span with these bounds a and b if and only if the weight function satisfies this inequality. It is bounded by two positive constants a and b whenever it is not 0. So that is what all of this means. So it's either 0, but if not, it's bounded by these two positive constants. And the system is a Riesz basis for its closed linear span if and only if the same weight function is now bounded by a and b on the whole of 0, 1 almost everywhere. So as I mentioned, for the proofs of these theorems, we can look into this book by Christensen, Frames and Bases. Now let's see what is a wavelet system. So in system of translates, we apply the translation operator. So now in addition to the translation operator, we apply the dilation operator. So then we have two parameters running, one for the translation and one for the dilation. So we consider translates by integers and dilations by powers of 2, integral powers of 2, which are called as dyadic dilations or binary dilations. So when we apply it on psi, this is the expression explicitly. 2 power j by 2 psi of 2 power j x minus k, and it is denoted by psi jk, where these two parameters denote the two parameters for translation and dilation. So this collection is what we call the wavelet system. And the characterization for this wavelet system to be orthonormal is given by these conditions. This is also given in terms of the Fourier transform of psi. And this collection is a Parseval frame for L2R if and only if these conditions hold true, again given in terms of the Fourier transform of psi. And this wavelet system is an orthonormal basis of L2 of R if and only if these conditions hold true. So this is in fact the necessary and sufficient conditions given for a function psi to be a wavelet. So a function psi is said to be a wavelet typically if this wavelet system generated by it is an orthonormal basis for L2 of R. So these theorems, the proofs can be looked into in these books by Christensen as well as Hernandez and Weiss, given here. Okay, so now let's look at a brief literature survey of related problems. So we see in 2000, Marcin Barnek, he considered a collection of, he considered a system of translates which are generated by countably many generators. So what I have been speaking about earlier, we considered a single function phi and generated translates using that one function phi. So he is considering countably many generators and all the system of translates generated by these. And then he characterizes this entire collection to be frame sequence, Riesz basis, and so on. And his results are given in terms of the so-called range functions. And then later, Cabroli and Paternostro and independently Kamiya-Bigol and Reissi-Tosi extended these results to the case of a locally compact abelian group. So while Cabroli and Paternostro gave the results in terms of range functions, Kamiya-Bigol and Reissi-Tosi, they gave the results in terms of the weight function. Later, the research also moved towards the non-abelian setting. And for instance, Radha and Shravan Kumar, they in 2013 considered similar problem for a compact non-abelian group. Barberi, Hernandez and Azita Maili, they looked at similar problems now on the polarized Heisenberg group, which is now a non-commutative and a non-compact group. So they considered the system of translates on the polarized Heisenberg group and they characterized it to be frame sequence and Riesz and so on. And their results were in terms of the so-called bracket map, which involves the Fourier transform of the group Fourier transform of those functions. And then Radha and Shashwat Adhikari, they also considered the system of twisted translates in L2CN and looked at similar problems. So when we say twisted translates, it's not the usual translate. So besides the translates, there's another term, and hence the name twisted translates. And then they use these results to uplift all of them to the case of the Heisenberg group. And there they considered countably many generators which were mutually orthogonal. And this year, 2021, Radha and Shantiranjan Das, they had considered, again, translates, countably many generators, but now they did not impose as mutually orthogonal. They had considered that setting, and they characterized that entire collection to be frame sequence and resequence and so on in terms of operators which were arising from the fiber map. Now, this is in Baunig and Ross in 2015, they considered something different. So all along we've been talking about translation by integers, for instance, on R. Baunig and Ross, what they had considered, they took a locally compact abelian group, and if you were to take R, instead of having Z, that is, they made it relaxed. They didn't consider the discrete restrictions. So when we were taking R, we were considering translations by integers. So they did not consider the discrete aspect of it. They just wanted a closed co-compact subgroup, and hence the name translation invariant. Otherwise, they generally call shift invariant. And Baunig had also considered the shift modulation invariant spaces, wherein, in addition to the translation operator, he considered the modulation operator, and then he considered that collection of that system of functions and characterized them to be frame sequence and resequence and so on. Later, Cabrel and Paternostro extended these results to the case of a locally compact abelian group. So now what we would be considering is the Heisenberg group. We will consider the wavelet system on the Heisenberg group and then look at the orthonormality of that collection. So to understand what the Heisenberg group, it is basically the set Rn cross Rn cross R with this group law. So we have x by t, an element of Hn, likewise UVS is another element of Hn. So x, y, u, v are in Rn, whereas t and s are in R. So how the operation works is as follows. So in the first coordinate we have x plus u, second y plus v. So they reach in Rn. And the third one is t plus s plus half u dot y minus v dot x. So these are again elements of R. It is in fact the presence of this term which makes this group operation non-abelian. The non-commutativity comes from this term. So this is a non-abelian, non-compact, but a locally compact group. And the Haar measure on this group is the Lebesgue measure dx dy dt. Now, in order to talk about the Fourier transform, we need to understand the representations of this Heisenberg group. Why? Because now if you're taking R, the Fourier transform is given in terms of e power 2 pi ix psi. If we move to a locally compact abelian group, then we consider what are known as characters in order to talk about the Fourier transform. So in fact, e power 2 pi ixi is a character for R. But when we move to the non-abelian setting, we need to understand the representations. And these representations fall back to the characters in the case of an abelian group. So here, by Stone-Fun-Neumann theorem, we understand that every infinite dimensional irreducible unitary representation of the Heisenberg group is unitarily equivalent to the representations pi lambda, where lambda is any non-zero real number, and they're given as follows. So what exactly is that? For an element x by t in the Heisenberg group, pi lambda of x by t is a unitary operator on the representation space L2 of Rn. So for phi in L2 of Rn, pi lambda of x by t operating on phi is now an element in L2 of Rn. So at psi, it is defined this way. So we can talk about the group Fourier transform now. So for f in L1 of Hn, for any non-zero lambda, f roof of lambda is integral over the Heisenberg group, f of z comma t, pi lambda of z comma t, dz dt. So we mentioned that pi lambda of z comma t is an operator, and so is f roof of lambda. It is in fact a bounded operator acting on L2 of Rn, given explicitly this way, f roof of lambda operating in phi is equal to integral over the Heisenberg group f of zt pi lambda of zt operating in phi dz dt. And this integral is the Bochner integral taking values in the Hilbert space L2 of Rn. So in fact, this operator, the norm, is less than equal to the norm of f in the Heisenberg, the L1Hn norm of that. We also have the convolution defined in L1 of Hn, like how we have it in the classical case. So the convolution is defined as follows: f star g of zt is integral over the Heisenberg group f of z comma t w of s inverse, the group operation operating here, and gws dw ds. So under this convolution, L1 of Hn becomes a non-commutative Banach algebra. In fact, the Fourier transform behaves with the convolution much like it does within the classical case. That is, the Fourier transform of the convolution is the product of the Fourier transforms. And just like how we have the Fourier transform defined for L2 of R in the classical case from L1 intersection L2 through the density argument, similarly, we can have the definition of the group Fourier transform for functions in L2 of Hn also through the density argument. And in that case, the group Fourier transform satisfies this Plancherel formula, that is norm f roof L2 of R star B2 d mu is equal to norm f L2 of Hn. Here B2 stands for the class of Hilbert-Schmidt operators on L2 of Rn, and L2 of R star B2 d mu stands for all those space of function, for all those functions on R star taking values in B2, and square integrable with respect to the Plancherel measure mod lambda power n d lambda. So for the study on the Heisenberg group, for more details, one may refer to books by Foland as well as Thangavelu. These are the references. So now that we've understood what is the Heisenberg group, in order to talk about the wavelet system, we need to understand the translation and the dilation. So what we consider here are the left translations and the non-isotropic dilations. Why we say left translation? Because we are talking about a non-abelian group. So we fix that here. So translation by UVS of psi at x by t is psi of UVS inverse with x by t. And the non-isotropic dilation is given as delta A of psi at x by t is mod a square, psi of ax, ay, a square t. So what we notice here, the first two coordinates, they multiplied by a and the third by a square, and hence the term non-isotropic dilation. And we have this term here, so that we have it as a unitary operator. So the wavelet system that we consider are those translations by integers, L2 KLM, and we consider the non-isotropic dyadic dilations. Now we also look at this function, which was defined by Radha and Shashwat Adhikari when they were studying the system of translates on the Heisenberg group. So this function is G psi KL, which involves the inner product, the Hilbert-Schmidt inner product of the Fourier transform of psi and the Fourier transform of the translate of psi. And we define this function, h psi jkl, which is given in terms of the Hilbert-Schmidt inner product of the Fourier transform of psi and the Fourier transform of the dilated translate of psi. And this is our necessary and sufficient conditions for this wavelet system to be orthonormal in L2 of H. So these are G psi 0 of lambda is 1 almost everywhere, G psi KL of lambda is 0 when KL is not equal to 0, 0, and h psi jkl is 0 for positive j and integers kl. So these are the characterizing conditions for orthonormality of the wavelet system. Let us look at an example. So we take this function psi of x by t, which is the Haar function in the x variable, Haar function in the y variable, and the characteristic function in the t variable. So when we say Haar function, this is what we mean. It is 1 on 0 to half and minus 1 on half to 1. So the wavelet system generated by this psi is orthonormal in L2 of H. So let's quickly look at an outline of the working. So we have a rough feel of how it is to work in the Heisenberg group, that is the group operations. So we take a positive j and we take the integers k, l, m, and if you look at the inner product of psi and the dilated transit of psi, you just write it out, all the integrals and the function explicitly. And let's integrate with respect to the x variable first. So when we write it this way, what we observe is if we take k satisfying this, it could be less than equal to -1 or it could be greater than equal to 2 power j minus 1. What we understand is the supports of this function. It's either non-overlapping or at most as a set of measure 0. So then the integral will be 0 and hence would be the inner product if we took k satisfying this. Likewise, if we were to integrate with respect to y first, then we find the same when L satisfies this range. So it's enough to consider k between these two and likewise L also between these two. So considering that, we can further simplify and write the inner product in this manner, and we will now first integrate with respect to the t variable. So though we write it out as a, this a involves x and y. So if we integrate with respect to t, we will still have terms, some terms involving x and y. So now what we notice is that if the intersection of 0, 1 and this interval is if the intersection is non-empty, of course integral is 0, but even if it measures 0, the inner product is 0, of course. But what we would say is even if that is not the case, we will still be able to show that the inner product is 0, for which we will have to consider various cases of a, because a will depend on x and y, so we have to consider various cases. So let's consider one case, that is suppose a satisfies this these conditions. So then we can use that, simplify the previous expression, arrive at this, integrate with respect to t, get the term in terms of x and y. And now suppose we integrate with respect to x first. So we know that our function has two different values on two different intervals, right? It's 1 and -1. So accordingly, we split the intervals, split the integrals, integrate them independently. But what we get is a constant independent of y. So we just have the hard function on y after that, which is then 0. So we have that inner product 0. So likewise, we can work out other cases, be minor changes, but it's more or less the same. And then we will be able to show that the inner product is 0. So what we have so far proved is that for the positive j, psi with this dilated transit of psi is 0. So now if we consider j1, k1, l1, m1, the dilated transit of psi on one side, another one j2, k2, l2, m2 on the other side, then we can push the dilation inside, push the left translation also to the other side, then we have psi on one side of the inner product, and then the dilate of psi. Now this can be reworked and we can write it as a dilated translate of psi, wherein the parameters look like this. So for instance, m0 is m2 minus 2 power 2 j2 minus j1 m1 plus 2 power j2 minus j1 k1 l2 minus k2 l1. So we are able to show that for any two different j1 and j2, which would mean that j1 minus j2 is different from 0. And by what we had proved earlier, we can show that this inner product is 0. Now if j1 is equal to j2, then we use the fact that the dilation is unitary, and then we have just the translates. So we push the translate to the other side, then we have a psi and a translate of psi. And we take the simple case psi and just say we take L2k Lm of psi and see what happens to the inner product. And then we notice, when we write it out explicitly, we notice that if we take k not equal to 0, then these two functions would be, the product would be 0 because of their non-overlapping supports, and hence the inner product will be 0. The same will be the case for L not equal to 0. So that would mean if we took two different k1 L1 and k2 L2 with either of the coordinates being different, then the inner product will be 0. And on the other hand, if they are all equal, so if we have j1 equal to j2, k1, l1 equal to k2, l2, then it will just be in terms of m2 and m1, and that we can show to be delta m1, m2, which shows that this wavelet system generated by psi is indeed orthonormal in L2 of H. Now, if we were to plot this function that we just considered now, this is how it will look. So this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and this is the z-axis. So for x between 0 to half, y between 0 to half, and z between 0 to half, the function is 1. But if we take x from 0 to half, y from 0 to half, and z from half to 1, this is -1. So on we can understand each of these boxes. For a better clarity, we can look at this cross section. Now this is another example. Now in this example, it is psi1 as a function of x, psi2 is a function of y, and psi3 is a function of t. And we take it such that psi1 roof and psi2 are the hard functions of 0, 1. Psi3 is the Shannon wavelet, that is its Fourier transform is given by the characteristic function of the union of these two intervals, -1 to -12 and half to 1. If we take this function, then we can show that the wavelet system generated by psi is indeed orthonormal in L2 of H. But to show the orthonormality, we won't be able to work it out like how we did earlier with the inner product. We can use the equivalent conditions that we had seen earlier for the orthonormality of wavelet system in the Heisenberg group. So using those three equivalent conditions, we can prove it for this example. So now we shall look at the problem of completeness for this subcollection of wavelet system. So we had considered earlier delta 2 per j L 2 k L m psi. So now if we consider this subcollection delta 2 per j L 0 0 m psi, then and assume that this is orthonormal, and if we assume this in the hypothesis, then we can show that the closed linear span of this wavelet system is actually L2 of H. That is, this collection is complete. So in order to go through an outline of the proof, we shall consider the following definitions and results. So these results can be obtained as particular cases of the analogous theorems given by Radha and Shashwat Adhikari when they studied the system of translates on the Heisenberg group, which can be found in this paper. So here we consider the principal shift invariant space. So what we mean by that is, if we take a function psi, we take all the translates of psi, take its closely linear span, and then of course a closure, then what we have is a shift invariant space, and this is in fact called the principal shift invariant space generated by psi. So we denote it by V naught of psi, and this theorem gives a characterization for the system of translates of this form to be a Parseval frame for its closed linear span. That is, for the shift invariant, the principal shift invariant space generated by psi. For that, the translates is a Parseval frame if and only if this condition is satisfied. So we have this is a weight function in this case, that is 1 whenever it is not 0. And that function is given in terms of the Hilbert-Schmidt norm of the Fourier transform of psi. So this is a characterization for Parseval frame. And now suppose we have the principal shift invariant space generated by psi, and if we have another collection of system of translates generated by phi, and if this system of translates is a Parseval frame for this principal shift invariant space, then the function phi is said to be a Parseval frame generator of V naught of psi. And this theorem is an important one in the sense that it gives a decomposition of any shift invariant space that is invariant under these translations in terms of principal shift invariant spaces. So we have V suppose it is invariant under these translations L00M, then that V can be written as an orthogonal direct sum of these principal shift invariant spaces generated by psi n's. Further, the translates generated by psi will also be a Parseval frame for each of these spaces. We have that, and so for any f in V, we can write out this expression for its Fourier transform. It's given out in terms of these functions Rn, where each Rn is linked with this principal shift invariant space generated by psi n. And of course, the Fourier transform of psi n will also appear in this expression. And we also have the expression for the norm of f given in terms of the norm of these Rn's, which is L to T G psi n 00 in this space. Further, since these translates are a Parseval frame here, G psi n 00 will be 1, and so we can even rewrite it in this form. This theorem gives the necessary and sufficient condition for this collection of translates to be orthonormal in L2 of H, and it is given in terms of this weight function G psi 0, 0. We shall consider this function, which is defined on a set of subspaces of L2 of H. To be more specific, they consider all these subspaces which are invariant under these translations, and thus mapping this function sigma operates on all these invariant subspaces of L2 of H. So how it works is, for any principal shift invariant space that is of this form, the sigma of that space is given by this term whenever lambda is in support of psi roof. That is, psi roof of lambda is not equal to 0. That's the only meaning there. So when it is not equal to 0, it's given as the B2 norm of psi roof of lambda squared mod lambda divided by the weight function, and 0 otherwise. So this is for any principal shift invariant space. But if we have any shift invariant space, using the direct sum decomposition that I had mentioned of earlier, we can define this sigma additively. So it is additive on all these orthogonal sums. So it can be defined for any shift invariant space of L2 of H. So with these, we can move into the proof of the theorem. I shall give an outline, but before that I shall state the theorem once again so we know exactly what we have and what we need to prove. So let us take psi to be in L2 of H such that this collection is orthonormal, and we also assume this condition, that is summation over J, norm psi roof of lambda by 2 power 2J, norm square, the Hilbert-Schmidt norm, mod lambda by 2 power 2J is equal to 1 almost everywhere, and then this collection will be complete. So for the proof, we first fix J and consider this space Wj0, which is defined in this manner. So we fix J, we vary all the M, that is the translates are varying. We take the span and the closure, and that is Wj0. Now, since this collection is orthonormal, we notice that these spaces Wj0 for all those integers J are mutually orthogonal. Further, for all the non-negatives J, Wj0 is invariant under these translations. And now we consider this direct sum Wj0 for all the J integers, and we take the orthogonal complement of that, which we denote by Z0. So our aim would be to show Z0 is 0, that is the orthogonal complement of this is 0, so that this is whole of L2 of H, which will show that that collection is in fact complete. But in order to show that Z0 is equal to 0, what we would actually do is, we will show that Z0 is contained in another space and show that that space is actually 0. So before that, let us consider this as well. That is, now we consider the direct sum of Wj0 for all the non-negative J, and then we take its complement and denote it by V0. So we had mentioned earlier that for all the non-negative J's, Wj0 is invariant under the translations. So is this direct sum, and so is the perpendicular, the orthogonal complement. So then they are all invariant under these translations. So once we have that, we can have decomposition of V0 into principal shift invariant spaces and so on. So now if we look at Z0, what we do is we fix I and we consider the direct sum of Wj0 for all J greater than equal to I. Then this direct sum is actually contained in the whole direct sum, wherein we consider all the integers. So since this is contained in that, the complements will satisfy the reverse set inclusion. So Z0 will be in the complement of this, and this can be related with V0 in this manner. So Z0 is basically contained in delta 2 power I of V0 for all I in Z. Having said that, Z0 will be contained in the intersection of all of these spaces, and is in fact this intersection that we shall prove to be 0. So we go by contradiction. Suppose we have a non-zero F in this intersection, and we can also assume that the norm F is 1 without loss of generality. So with that being the case, what we note is that delta 2 per Jf, the dilation of F for all the non-negative J's is actually in V0. Now, as I mentioned earlier, V0 is invariant under translations. So we have the decomposition of V0 in terms of the principal shift invariant spaces. Further, each of the psions are a Parseval frame generator of the V0 of psion, which means those translates are Parseval frame for this space V naught of psi n. And for each of these n's, we have rjn's, so that delta 2jf, which is an element of V naught, its Fourier transform can be written out this way, which was mentioned in that theorem before we started off with the proof. So the Fourier transform of delta 2 per jf can be written out in terms of rjn's, and the Fourier transform of psi n, and also the norm of delta 2 per jf can be written out in terms of the norm of the rjn. And since this delta 2 per j is a unitary operator, it's an isometry, so this norm is actually norm of f, which we assume to be 1. So we have basically 1 equal to summation of over n, the norm of rjn's. Now, using this relation, we can write the Hilbert-Schmidt norm of the Fourier transform of delta 2 per jf in terms of this. And we have the rjn's and the Fourier transforms of psi n. And we can further prove that the Hilbert-Schmidt norm of the Fourier transform of the dilation of f, this one, is related with the norm of the dilation of the Fourier transform. So here we have the Fourier transform of the dilation that is connected with the dilation of the Fourier transform. So then we can plug this in here, change variables appropriately with the lambda 2 per 2j and so on, and arrive at the norm of f roof of lambda itself. So this is what we have. So the B2 norm of f roof of lambda is less than equal to this expression. So now what we do is we take the integral over 1 to 4, that interval. So we will have the integral, an integral here, and the summation. So we first apply the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality for the summation and then for the integral, and we will have these two terms after simplification. So what we do here is we apply the periodicity of rjn and the fact that the sum over n equal to 1 to infinity, the norm of rjn, the L2T norm of rjn is 1, which we had shown earlier. And so this entire term will be actually just 3, the number 3. And here what we can do is we write this as the characteristic function of this interval. And this whole thing, the summation over n, norm psi n, roof, etc., can be written as the sigma map of a space. That's exactly what it is. So as I mentioned, we use the periodicity of rjn, and this whole term is just 3. Now, we had mentioned earlier that V naught is invariant under translations. So it has the decomposition into the principal shift invariant spaces. So we can write the sigma map of V naught in terms of the sigma maps of each of these principal shift invariant spaces, which can be explicitly written in terms of the generators. Actually, we also had a term divided by the weight function. But since they were Parseval frame, we use the characterization of the Parseval frame and get that to be actually 1. So we have sigma V naught explicitly in this form. So we substitute all of that here, and this is what we have. So this is true for all j greater than or equal to 0. So then we take the limit as j tends to 0. The right hand side is fine, it's independent of j. Here we see that the integrand tends to 0. But in order to apply the limit for the integral, we shall appeal to the Lebesgue dominated convergence theorem, for which we need to show that this integrand is bounded by an L1 function. So we see that this integrand is bounded by sigma V naught. So if we show that the sigma V naught is an L1, then we will have this integral going to 0. So for that, to find out what is, to show that sigma V naught is L1 of R, we need to first find out what is sigma V naught. So for that, we will consider, we've already seen this, that is what the definition of V naught. It was the complement of this direct sum of Wj0 for j non-negative. So then L2 of H can be written as the direct sum of V naught and its complement, that is direct sum of V naught and all these Wj zeros. I mean, so we have seen that the sigma map works additively on the orthogonal sums. So sigma of L2 of H will be sigma V naught plus summation over all the j sigma Wj0. It is known that sigma of the whole space is 1, and sigma of V naught that we do not know. Sigma of W00 we can write because W00 is just the closed linear span of all the translates of psi. So it is a principal shift invariant space. So its sigma map can be written out explicitly in this manner. So what we do not know are the sigma wj0 for all the j greater than 0. But we can find this relation. We know we can observe this relation, that is, for j greater than 0, w of j0 is connected with w00 through the dilations, and we can show that the sigma map of the dilation of V is the dilation of the sigma map of V. So then sigma of wj0 can be written as the dilation of the sigma of w00, which is in this form, and then use this explicit expression and write it out here. So now we know everything. We know this, we know each of these, so we can write out what sigma V0 is. So it will be 1 minus this expression. Now our hypothesis was this entire sum over j in z was 1. So if we put that here, what would be remaining will be all those negative indices j, negative integers j, for which this will hold. Now j is negative, this j is in the denominator, so we can rewrite it to be j equal to 1 to infinity, with all of them coming at the top. So now we can take the integral of mod sigma V0, it is written out this way, and now we can rewrite this to be the L2 R star B2 d mu norm of psi roof, appeal to the Plancherel theorem of the group Fourier transform of the Heisenberg group, write it in terms of that norm psi L2H squared and a convergent series. So it's finite, which shows that sigma V0 is indeed in L1 of R. So having said that, we can now apply the limit for the integrals, and this integral is 0. So since the integrand is non-negative, the Hilbert-Smith norm of f of lambda should be 0 for all lambda in 1, 4. Now we can repeat this entire reasoning for any function delta 2 power jf for any integer j, because this is also an element in this intersection. So what we would have is delta 2j f roof of lambda, the B2 norm is 0 for almost every lambda in 1, 4, this one. And since we know that the Fourier transform of the dilation of f, that's B2 norm, is the B2 norm of the dilation of the Fourier transform of f, using this condition, what that would mean is the B2 norm of f roof of lambda is 0 for all lambda in this interval. So this is true for every j. So what we notice is when j is equal to 0, this interval is 1 to 4. And when j is positive, it will cover everything between 0 and 1. And when j is negative, it will cover everything from 4 to infinity. So this will be 0 for all lambda on the positive real line. So what we do next is, instead of taking the integral from 1 to 4, we will now take the integral from -4 to -1, repeat all of this, and we would get norm f roof of lambda B2 is 0 for all the negative lambda. So which would mean that the Hilbert-Smith norm of f roof of lambda is 0 for all the lambda, which would mean that this norm is 0. Again, appealing to the Plancherel theorem of the group Fourier transform of the Heisenberg group, we get norm f square L2 H is 0, which means f is 0, which will show that this intersection is in fact 0, because we started off with f in this intersection. So we've shown that f is 0. This intersection is 0. The orthogonal complement is 0. C orthogonal sum is whole of L2 of H, which is nothing but the closed linear span of the collection that we consider, which proves the theorem. So now we have a corollary, which is such that if we have psi wherein the entire collection is orthonormal, then psi will not satisfy the hypothesis that we mentioned, which is like one of the conditions that we see in R. So that if we just have that condition, then we do not have this entire collection to be orthonormal. I would like to mention this open problem. That is, if we consider in the classical case, the simplest wavelet is that constructed using the Haar function. So that is, we take the scaling function to be the characteristic function. Then from there, we understand that the wavelet is the Haar function. The mother wavelet is Haar function. And all the wavelet system generated by that Haar function is an orthonormal basis for L2 of R. It is the Haar wavelet. So if we look at something similar in the Heisenberg group and take the scaling identity as the characteristic function, say x, y, and t, even the wavelet, which could be the wavelet system generated by that function, construction of that in the case of Heisenberg group, even the simplest one, remains as an open problem as of today. So I just wanted to mention that. And so the entire, the content of this talk is based on this research paper by Radha and myself, which appeared in 2019 in the Journal de Mathematics, appears at Appliques. And these are our references. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the talk. If anyone has any questions, we can take them up now. But before that, if possible, can you please unmute your mics and thank the speaker?
Thank you.